So let me begin the session by giving some overview about RAG. This topic is more about how do you produce AI-friendly content. And I know in this conference, people are actually talking from the technical writer's perspective, but I build chatbots. So I'm coming from more from the technology angle and then trying to help technical writers on how to tweak the content by giving some examples that we learned from some of our customer implementation. So let's dive into giving you some high level about what's actually happening. So it's used to be the audience for our knowledge base content or the documentation were humans, but these days we are transitioning into humans plus bots, but in the near future, it'll be like an AI bot ingesting. And the traditional way people actually discovered our documentation through search engines like Google and Bing, but these days it's all ChatGPT, Claude, and Perplexity. We used to do a lot of SEO as a tech writer. We read a lot of amazing SEO meta description, and then we showed to the marketing team we are driving traffic to the documentation type, and then also helping with some kind of a sign up and stuff like that. But in the future, it's more about semantic and structuring. Gone are the days where your customers are actually searching for keywords and landing on your knowledge base. These days are all prompts. And here's an interesting paradigm. The outcomes of your knowledge base, knowledge consumption, it's more about humans doing work. For example, if you write a piece of documentation on how to configure a particular feature in your SaaS product, somebody's reading that and then they're going to go to your SaaS product and then do those procedures. Those days are going to be outnumbered. If a chatbot can actually produce a how-to procedure or a step-by-step procedure with high accuracy, why can't an agentic bot go and execute that in the UI? So I'm actually questioning the thought whether you need to have a product knowledge to use a product. It doesn't matter whether it's a hardware product or a software product. It's a fundamental question we need to ask, which means the technical writer roles have to shift from producing a documentation to something called as a truth keeper. Okay, I just want to repeat the word truth keeper. Because if an AI chatbot is actually producing an output for a question to a customer, and if an agentic bot is going to execute that response in the UI, you have to be 100% accurate to have the trust factor. So I fundamentally believe that the technical writers are going to be the truth keepers in the new world, which has a lot of agents talking to other agents. So RAG is a popular kind of the framework that most of the chatbots actually use. I don't want to go into the detail, but just give you a high-level example. Let's say if somebody asks a question like, what is document changes pricing plan? And this was the response produced by a chatbot. So here is how it actually pieced together. So it chunks, and then it actually has all this reference article. And if you look at it, the first line of this response comes from the second cited article from the first paragraph. Okay, and then the second line of the chatbot response comes from the first article from the first paragraph. And here's the interesting bit. The last line comes from the fourth cited article, but it comes from the last paragraph. So it doesn't, so it's basically stitching together different information and then putting it together. So that's essentially how RAG actually works on the high level understanding. So how do you write? How do you write a good AI-friendly content? The first aspect is you need to understand the characteristics of writing for a human versus a bot or a chatbot. Humans have this limitation. We have less attention span and we get bored reading more words. But on the other hand, the chatbots are text-hungry applications. The more text data you feed, they love it. So there's a different kind of characteristics. So for a chatbot, you need to write detailed content. So that's the one way to go to producing an AI-friendly content. And this has to be extremely comprehensive. More importantly, the question comes to is, how do I optimize my content for both human and a bot consumption? Right now, we are in this transition phase. That's why we are actually thinking about optimizing it. But we are moving into the world where a bot is the only one who's going to read our documentation. We have to be happy with that. And that's why we are moving and then putting all this content in a more detailed fashion. And make sure you have few FAQs. I know when I talk about this FAQs, the technical writers, they get a little bit um, um, unsettling, because the moment you say the FAQ, you have a content design problem. Why do you want to have an FAQ? But from the bot perspective, the more the FAQs you have is are more like a cheat sheets. Um, if you have content and you have some kind of an FAQ, it can actually strengthen its value proposition and make sure the content is accurate. So that's very important in terms of writing FAQs as part of your article. The other aspect is you have to use business glossary terms consistently. Uh, um, I, I've been in many meetings where a lot of stakeholders, they talk about the same concepts, but they use synonyms. Let me give you an example. When I was in Australia and then working for a transport department, there are two departments there. One is called the roads department, who uses this terms called roads and trips, and there is a roads operation people who also use the same term. And when there was a budget proposal that's been discussed, there was a discrepancy in the numbers, and we went on to this discussion to find out what that is. For roads people, the operations people, if you're going from point A to point C via point B, it's one journey and two trips. So point A to point C, so you go to point A to point B, one trip. B to C is trip number two, and you have two trips and one journey. But for roads, people who lay roads, the trips and the journeys are exactly the same. So there's this confusion on the definitions, because both the parties actually assume the right definitions. The same with your technical documentation as well. You have to use the business glossary term consistently. Otherwise, because the chatbots, based on the semantic matching, they can confuse. Okay, they can get confused very easily. And the use of pronouns as well. Sometimes when you chunk the content in the RAG, you need to make sure that your subject doesn't start with a pronoun in the chunked content. Extremely important. Otherwise, your context gets thrown off. So I would ask you to repeat the subject whenever when you chunk. Then you actually talk about to your developers when they chunk the content, and then go and identify the chunks which starts with the pronoun, and then actually replace that pronoun with the proper subject. And of course, you have to produce bias-free, inclusive language, and I think that's universal these days. The In terms of the information architecture, we have to streamline the content in a more clear, structured way, whereby your information architects gets into a lot of work, and make sure you write article headings, not a generic one. Um, um, you need to make sure you should avoid generic titles such as fee, pricing. Probably you have like 10 different software products. You need to say a fee or a pricing for a particular product. So the more context you give on the title actually helps the AI, the chatbot, actually reason and then find out, give them more accurate response. And here's the other important thing: you need to make sure your content is not ambiguous. It is extremely hard at scale, especially, and more importantly, if you have more the feature velocities happening more aggressively in your organization, the ambiguity actually gets is somehow it's built in. You need to find out if you change something, you need to change it 1,000 places, and it's very hard for a technical writer to keep up. So make sure you do not have kind of ambiguous content in your knowledge base or your documentation. And you can also use AI to do that. You can throw your entire documentation to Gemini or a Claude. Then you have to prompt to identify some kind of ambiguity, like factual ambiguity, inference ambiguity, and things like that. So it's very important that you do that. And tables, these are my favorites. Whenever I see this, I get so excited, because as technical writers, we are so passionate about reducing the redundancy and giving clarity, but tables are extremely bad for LLMs. They can read it only if it's complete. When I say complete, all the table values are filled. If you have null values, how do you expect the LLM to actually infer what's that? Okay. And when you use the symbols like cross and tick, sometimes a cross means yes in a lot of scenarios, and you got to be very careful when you use it. And then all the ticks have to be annotated to an LLM, so that tick means yes, cross means no, so they can actually infer better. Um, I would rather have a table complete to have that. And if you're using any kind of abbreviation, use ABB or tag to make sure that you actually expand the synonym. Code snippet. We love to put a lot of code in our technical documentation. Make sure you use the code tag, and you add description if you can actually add more comment. And then when the chatbot is trying to give a response as a code, it knows how to infer the code basically. So it's extremely important. There's no metadata standard in terms of what kind of data can be fed into chatbots. There's no universal metadata, and it's depends on a lot of vendors how they actually use it. Again, you have to talk to your chatbot vendor about what kind of metadata that can be passed, which can be used to refine the chatbot response. So here's the interesting bit I really want to share. So we have our own chatbot, which we launched a couple of years ago, and our customers have been using it. And I just want to share some of the learnings. The first learning I want to share is they have written a long how-to procedure, a step-by-step procedure. As you can actually see in the screen, it's about 8-minute read, and there are about 22 items in the step-by-step procedure. So what happened was, when our customer asked, they put in this question, and we found that our chatbot actually only give a partial answer. Okay, and then we were intrigued what actually happened. The LLM model we are actually using to do the chat completion had about 16,000 tokens as an output limit, but the response from this question actually exceeded that limit. Okay, so the answer was completely truncated. So what we actually done is we actually went back to the customer, and then they raised a support ticket, of course, and then we asked them to actually rewrite the procedure. And then now the how to procedure is about 12 steps and in about 5-minute read, and all, instead of having a 3 chunks, it comes as 1 chunk. And then the LLM was able to produce an answer within the token limit. Now, given that the large language model are expanding the token limits, which is good, but what I'm trying to say, convey to you, is that you got to be mindful of the limitations of the large language model they're actually using, especially in terms of the tokens, output tokens. The other aspect is business glossary. If you look at the example here, they actually have an article called definitions, and they actually dump all the definitions into one kind of an article. But having all definition in one article lacks the context for an LLM. Just basically, if you have some kind of a definition, you got to put as part of the article rather than curating all the definitions in under one article. That's not how usually the RAG actually works, but it's not a good kind of an information architecture to have. The other aspect is FAQs. So they have a separate FAQ section where they actually put in all the FAQs. That is also a good practice, but it's better to have within your article, maybe at the bottom of the page. Make sure the FAQs does not repeat the information that's already present in the article. Maybe you got to talk about some kind of nuances and stuff like that. The more FAQs you provide, the better it's actually for a chatbot to actually answer with high accuracy. Yeah. The other one is the acronym. So whenever you describe an acronym, it's better to include the definitions. Again, I was talking about this ABB tag. Just use that to abbreviate what that is. The most important aspect here is when you're using acronyms, or if you have some kind of a business glossary or some kind of a terminology management, you can actually pass the whole information to the chatbot in terms of the completion. So whenever it actually identifies a synonym, then given the chatbot has already known that synonym and it knows what's its associated actual business term is, it can actually rephrase its response. So that's very important for a user to be educated about the business term you use. Okay, extremely good in terms of that. And then Avoid having a generic title. Here's a best example of one of our customers. They are actually putting inviting a new user. So this is very easy. So if you look at their prompt analytics, then this is what actually comes up, and they actually change the title to have it more precise. And here's the thing: the drag does not have time awareness. So if you're publishing some kind of a change log which is based on a date, and if some of your customers comes and ask what is the latest software version, it's not going to pull based on the chronology, the descending order in terms of the time. And avoid use terms like new, update, enhance. Any kind of time sensitive words you should avoid in your technical documentation for a RAG system to actually work properly. Um, Again, avoid having duplicate titles. If you are, again, it also confuses the RAG architecture. Here is one of our examples where we had articles of the same uh, title, but the content is actually different. One is talking about Asana, other one is talking about one is talking about Zapier, other one is about Make. So here is some kind of a practical example I want to give before you implement the chatbot, which is this. So go to your knowledge base, and then you got to create a lot of test cases. Basically, you have to create a simple question, a hard question, a tricky question, and something that is a chatbot can never actually answer. Okay, and then you have to formulate your ground truth. Basically, any kind of so the ground truth is from your documentation, so you have to formulate that. And then you can also source some of this information from your customer facing teams, from your customer success team, sales, marketing, and so on. And then once you formulate the test cases, so you have your questions, you have your ground truth, then you look at some of these frameworks available. The OpenAI evals, there's RAGAS, and then the simple QA. These are open source frameworks, by the way. And then you compute metrics. So you put those questions through the chatbot and you get the response, and you compare the chatbot response with the ground truth, and you compute all these metrics like accuracy, content relevance, and faithfulness. Then you can actually fine tune the model, adjust the system prompt, or you can do content refactoring, try and assess before you take the chatbot live. Okay, it's a very important framework that a technical writer must do to take before you take the chatbot live. And this simple, hard, tricky questions is a definitely a hard thing to do. You can create a lot of yes or no question, what questions, which questions, and sometimes you got to create tricky question in terms of whether it actually infers from some of these things. Okay, and some of the questions should never be answerable. Okay, these are straightforward failed test cases that you should actually create part of the evaluation process. And once you've done that, you're good to go. So that's pretty much I want to talk about. I'm happy to take any questions.